Good afternoon. Today is March the 14th, 1904. This is a Junior News Network special report. I'm Fred Liu.
And I'm analyst Alex Harper, here in Washington, D.C. studios.
A Supreme Court announcement a minute ago affirmed the decree of the Circuit Court of the United States for the District of Minnesota. The justices ruled 5-4 that Northern Securities Company is operating as a monopoly and must be dissolved. Argued on December the 14th, 1903, the case of Northern Securities Company against the United States finally came to an end. Let's take a look at some basic information about this case. It is the first significant application of Sherman Antitrust Act, which was enacted in 1890 by the U.S. Congress to prohibit trusts or monopolies of any type, and was signed into law by President Benjamin Harrison. However, prior to this ruling, many politicians, including President McKinley, were hesitant to enforce this law. After the assassination of President McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt came to power and adopted a completely different approach on the issue of the government's role. Now he becomes the first politician ever to strictly enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act. In this case, President Roosevelt is directly involved, filing suits and voicing against the Northern Securities Company's illegal acts of forming monopolies and eliminating competitions. The Northern Securities Company was a trust formed in 1902 by E.H. Harriman, James Hill, J.P. Morgan, and John D. Rockefeller. The trust controlled the Great Northern Railway, the Northern Pacific Railway, the Burlington Railroad, and several other major railways in the United States. This is indeed a historic day, and reporter Donald Mullane is outside the Supreme Court with President Teddy Roosevelt. Donald, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Fred. I'm here with the President to ask him some questions after the trial. Mr. President, why have you chosen to employ the Sherman Antitrust Act, an act that has not been used since its inception 14 years ago today, against the Northern Securities Company?
I have chosen to employ the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up the monopoly, in this case, the Northern Securities Company. The Sherman Antitrust Act has been enacted for 14 years, and no other president has broken up any monopoly with this law. As we all know, the Northern Securities Company controls much of the nation's railroad system, and its monopoly allows it to eliminate competition, raise prices, and oppress the workers' rights. I'm obliged to break up this trust for the welfare of society.
Mr. President, before the trial, do you have any contact with J.P. Morgan?
Yes, I warn them of the potential consequences if they do not break up their combination. In fact, they have suggested to have government officials to fix the system from their inside. However, I believe this will not be a solution. In order for America to maintain its freedom of market, there cannot be monopoly of any
Mr.
kind.
President, how do you think that trust busting will help the country?
Trust busting will have a positive impact on the country. Before my presidency, President McKinley held a conservative approach to the issue of government role in society. He believed in a limited government. Since I'm now president, I will respect McKinley's view, but at the same time, I will also increase the government's power to help maintain freedom of market.
Mr. President, do you intend to use the act on any other large companies? If so, can you tell us which ones?
For now, I cannot tell you about the details of my next plans. But one thing for sure, I will not tolerate any kind of monopoly here in the United States. Other monopolies should be aware that if they do not change their ways, there will be serious consequences.
How do you think that the country will react to your systematic restrictions of large monopolies?
The rich will dislike it, but the vast majority of Americans are going to be affected positively by the breaking of monopolies, because it opens up a free market in which prices will lower due to the competition, and everyone is allowed to participate in the business world freely. Freedom and equality is our national principle, and I believe trust busting is going to uphold this very principle and make our country a better place in the business world.
Thank you, Mr. President. Back to the studio with Alex Harper and Fred Liu.
Thank you, Donald, for the report. So, Alex, how do you think of this event?
Before this ruling, Roosevelt believed he could use any power not specifically denied from him by Congress. This ruling will likely decrease the disparity between the rich and the poor in this country, which is exactly what Roosevelt is hoping for, since he believes that poverty causes crime and radicalism. Another effect will be that competitive individualism will not be completely overrun by industrialization and urbanization. Workers can now have higher wages and fewer hours. Roosevelt, who loves exercise, is now also exercising his presidential power. As he has said before, This also shows the newfound regulatory power in the federal government. And before McKinley's assassination on September 6, 1901, lots has changed in America, and we would never have seen the prosecution of major companies such as Northwestern Securities. Roosevelt's doing so much for unionized workers that he's already being called a steam engine in trousers.
That is right. This historical moment fits under the period of 1898 to 1945, in which an increasingly pluralistic United States faces profound domestic and global challenges, debates the proper degree of government activism, and seeks to define its international role. The case reflects the thinking skill of historical causation. Roosevelt's attack on trusts and monopolies in the United States would not have occurred if President McKinley had not been assassinated on September 14, 1901. President McKinley held an extremely conservative view on the role and power of the government, while President Roosevelt holds a completely opposite view. It was President McKinley's assassination that directly led to the current Supreme Court case of Northern Securities Company against the United States, which might potentially challenge the entire landscape of American politics and business. In this way, politics and power is definitely the major theme of this groundbreaking event, which marks the triumph of the pro-big government side in the ongoing debate over the role of the state in society. As an active agent for change, this Supreme Court decision strengthened the power of the Sherman Antitrust Act and broadened the interpretation of Constitution's Commerce Clause. And there is one thing for sure, that this case resolved grants the American government greater power than ever before to interfere with state affairs and businesses. That's it for JNN News Network Special Report. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time on JNN News Network.